In 1940, a British officer walked onto an empty island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No one lived there. No one was supposed to be there. He found a human skull, then more bones. 13 in total. But one object next to those bones is the one that's kept researchers puzzled for 80 years. A woman's shoe. The bones were shipped off the island for testing. Somewhere along the way, they were lost. Forever. The shoe wasn't. For decades, researchers have asked the same question. Whose foot was in it? You're probably already thinking what everyone thinks the moment they hear another Amelia Earhart theory. Haven't we heard this before? Fair enough. But stay with me, because this isn't the story you're used to. Amelia Earhart, the most famous pilot in the world, vanished in 1937, trying to fly around the globe. The official answer is that she ran out of fuel and went down in open ocean. Case closed. But that skull, those bones and that shoe were found on an island nowhere near where she was supposed to crash. So either it's the strangest coincidence in aviation history, or she didn't go down in the ocean at all. In his official 1940 report, the officer who found the bones, a colonial administrator named Gerald Gallagher, wrote one line that nobody explained for decades. We'll get to that exact sentence, but first, look at what else was scattered around the site. Next to the bones was that shoe, a style commonly worn by American women in the 1930s. Alongside it, a box that once held a sextant, a navigator's instrument, and an empty bottle. The island is called Nikumaroro. Back then, it was called Gardner Island. It's tiny, uninhabited, and more than 1,000 miles from anywhere, but it sits almost exactly on the path Earhart was flying that day. For decades, a group of researchers called TIGHAR has been digging into this island, piece by piece, and what they found is hard to ignore. For days after Earhart's plane went missing, radio operators across the Pacific picked up faint distress calls, weak, broken, but there. Calls that shouldn't have been possible if her plane was already at the bottom of the ocean. On the island itself, there's an old shipwreck called the Norwich City, sitting on the same reef. Researchers also found a jar that once held freckle cream, a product Earhart was known to use. At a place researchers now call the Seven Site, they found the remains of small campfires, along with bones from birds, fish, and turtles. Someone knew how to open a clam, but didn't eat the head off a fish, which told researchers something important. That wasn't local island technique, that was someone who'd never had to survive like this before. Whoever was on this island wasn't a castaway who belonged there. They were someone stranded far from home, and on their foot, still, was that shoe. Picture it, the plane comes down on the reef at low tide, flat hard coral, just wide enough to land on. For a moment, it actually works, they're alive. But the tide doesn't stay low forever. Every 6 hours, the water creeps back in, and every time it does, it drags the plane a little further off the reef. Investigators believe this is why those radio calls kept coming for days. Someone was still climbing into the cockpit, still turning on the radio, still trying. One of those calls may have reached much further than anyone expected. A teenage girl in Florida, listening to her family's radio one night in 1937, said she picked up a woman's voice through the static, pleading for help, and even naming a man called Noonan. Investigators dismissed it for decades, but researchers who've studied her notebook since say the details are hard to explain unless she really heard something real. Eventually, the plane was pulled too far off the reef, and the calls stopped for good. Meanwhile, on the island itself, there was no fresh water and no food unless you knew where to look. Just heat, coral, and silence. Search planes did fly near the island in the weeks after. Official reports from the search even noted signs of recent habitation, but no wreckage was visible from the air, so the island was written off, and nobody went down to look closer. If someone really was down there, they weren't rescued because no one looked hard enough. And slowly, alone, still wearing that one shoe, the survivor at the Seven Site ran out of time. Remember that report from Gerald Gallagher, the officer who found the bones? Here's the exact sentence nobody explained for decades. The skeleton wasn't complete, just 13 bones out of the roughly 200 in a human body. In his own report, Gallagher noted the remains had been damaged by coconut crabs. Nikumaroro is home to one of the largest land crabs on Earth. Some grow up to 3 feet across, claw to claw, strong enough to crack open a coconut shell without much effort. They're scavengers, and on an island with almost no other source of meat, A body left out in the open wouldn't have stood a chance. That single sentence explains a lot: why so few bones were ever found, why no full skeleton ever turned up no matter how many expeditions came back to search, and why, 80 years later, there's still no definitive answer. Whatever was left of that castaway at the Seven site didn't stay there for long. But the shoe did. So here's a question you're probably already asking. Is this actually credible? Or is it just a really specific, really grim story? It's more credible than almost any other Amelia Earhart theory out there. Compare it to the others, that she was secretly a spy photographing Japanese military bases before she vanished, that she was captured and forced to broadcast propaganda over the radio with nobody ever finding proof, or that she secretly survived the war and became a bank employee in New Jersey under a different name. Those theories run mostly on speculation. This one runs on paperwork. Real bones, logged by a real colonial officer in 1940. A real analysis, done by doctors in Fiji. Real measurements, written down before the bones themselves were lost. In 2018, a forensic anthropologist named Richard Jantz ran those old measurements through modern software and found they matched Amelia Earhart's estimated build more closely than 99% of the people in his comparison sample. But this still isn't proof. The bones are gone, no DNA test was ever possible, and one may never be. What researchers have is a strong case, not a signed confession. Now here's where I have to be straight with you, because leaving this out would mean not telling you the whole story. Not everyone agrees. Some researchers argue those 1940 measurements are simply too rough to trust, no matter what software you run them through, since the bones themselves are gone and can never be double-checked. Others still lean toward the plane simply crashing and sinking near Howland, the same explanation that stood since 1937. Even TIGHAR, the group that has spent over 3 decades building this case, is careful never to call it more than what it is, a theory backed by strong circumstantial evidence, not a proven fact. So where does this stand right now? As of this year, the story isn't finished. Researchers spotted something new in satellite images of Nikumaroro's lagoon, a shape they're calling the Taraya object. Some believe it could be a genuine piece of Earhart's plane, buried and battered by almost 90 years underwater. A joint team from Purdue University and the Archaeological Legacy Institute has been trying to get out there to check. Twice now, the trip has been delayed, first over government permits, then because of the Pacific cyclone season. As it stands, the expedition is now set to depart in October, sailing out from the Marshall Islands to spend several days investigating the object up close. If you're watching this before that expedition happens, you're hearing this story before the world might get its answer. They could come back with nothing, or they could come back with the first real piece of Amelia Earhart's plane anyone has recovered in 89 years. Think back to where we started. A skull, 13 bones, a sextant box, and one shoe that outlasted everything else on that island. There may never be a DNA test. The rest of those bones may never turn up. But between the radio calls, the artifacts, and the measurements that keep matching her build, this is the closest thing we have to an answer. Whatever really happened on that island, one thing seems clear. She didn't just disappear. She fought to be found, right up until the end. If you want a full deep dive on Amelia Earhart, her whole story from the record-setting flights to that final radio call, let me know in the comments and I'll put it together. If this video was worth your time, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And this isn't even the strangest theory out there. There's one where people believe she survived the entire war and quietly became someone else. That one's next.